Hi, my name is Don Bowyer. I am recently retired from full-time academic life. My last position was professor of music and dean of the School of Arts at Sunway University, and I'm now back in the United States, and I continue to be active as a performer and a composer, trombone player and a composer. And in the in my role as composer, I've been very interested in the last 15 years or so in the concept of audience participation, getting an audience involved with a live performance. So before we get into that, though, I want to quickly define, at least for my sake, um, how I think of defining art and by extension music, and that is human communication through creative activity. And in the case of music, that's a communication from the composer to the performer to the audience, and when audience participation is involved, back to the performer. That becomes a two-way street between the performer and the audience, enhancing, maybe not the right word, creating a different kind of communication. I still compose music that doesn't involve audience participation, but I'm very interested in this. I have been since about 2008. I'll give you the details on that in a little bit. Music that involves audience participation would fall under the large heading of aleatoric music, and we're all familiar with the concept of aleatoric music or chance music, and it's been present in Western art music for centuries. In fact, there are examples from the 18th century of music where the composer wrote measures with numbers and gave instructions to the performer to roll dice before beginning and choose the sequence of measure numbers based on that. A couple of these compositions, in fact, are attributed to Mozart. And here is a couple images from one of them where you see the chart based on the dice roll and the music with the measure numbers. And there's a really interesting video of a modern performance of this piece on YouTube if you search for it, where you see a small group of people around a table rolling dice and choosing the measure numbers, and they've got every measure on a separate piece, small tiny piece of paper, and they line them all up on a board and which measure is next, and then perform it. It's very interesting. Moving on. In the 20th century and still in the 21st century, aleatoric music became a very common way for some composers, a certain circle of composers, to create music that would have some elements of that would be different every time. And a couple of common ways of doing this were to list or put on a page several different musical passages and ask the performer to choose from them. Or another example here you see on the screen now, where the performer is given some kind of graphic notation that indicates approximate pitches or approximate timing. And in both of these cases, and they're both somewhat common in that world of aleatoric music of the 20th century. In both of these cases, the performer is making artistic decisions within parameters that the composer has established. And that is very interesting to me. But what about getting the audience involved? So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to say that audience participation is defined as the intentional use of audience participation to meaningfully influence a performance of a piece of Western art music. That's a mouthful, but I think you know what I mean. And obviously, this will result in a different performance every time a piece is performed. An early example of audience participation that I'm familiar with, at least, would be the happenings movement in the 1950s and 60s. These were art performances that required the viewer to actively participate in each piece. There was, rather than being passive, I'm reading from the slide, obviously, but the invitations to one of these happenings specifically told the invited people that you will become part of the happenings. You will simultaneously experience them. And these were initially, the first happenings were sort of around the New York area and involved uh, prominent avant-garde artists in different fields, musicians, theater people, visual artists, etc. And they put together these happenings in someone's home or loft apartment or something. Um, and it sort of seems like a very interesting concept. I was fortunate to experience a recreation of one of these at a conference I was at 8 or 10 years ago in Vancouver. And there's a great video from the of a recreation from 2010, a great video from the John Cage Festival in Vienna, if you want to get online and find that. Um, Moving on from these happenings, John Cage, by the way, was one of those prominent people involved in the early happenings. His most best known work, I would imagine, is the piece 4 minutes and 33 seconds. He composed in 1952. And I'm sure everyone, all of you are familiar with this piece, and it involves a musician sitting on stage for 4 minutes and 33 seconds without playing any notes. And according to the website of the Cage Trust, in the work, no intentional sounds are made during its duration. Obviously, the audience itself, the sounds that the audience makes based on their reaction to this are really the sounds of the piece. And to be fair, I suspect that the audience, at least at the first performance, the audience was unaware that they were part of the performance. But in more recent performances, I imagine maybe you've seen one where most of the audience probably knew what was happening. Anyway, another example, sticking with John Cage for one more example, in 1969, he had this piece called 33 and a Third, and it was an audience participation event. The score calls for a performance space that has 12 record players and hundreds of records, and the audience is in the performance space. I think the first performance was in an art gallery space, and the audience is instructed to, at any time, pick up any record and put it on any turntable. And if there's already a record playing, you stop it and put on another one. If there's not, you get started. And obviously, you've got as many as 12 records playing at the same time. It's a bit of a cacophony, but it's entirely random sound that is influenced by the audience. My first experience with music that involved audience participation was in 2008. I was at a conference, and a couple of friends of mine, David Bryan Williams and Taylor Harding, had composed a piece called Grassroots, which they later called Grassroots 2008 because they had a later version of it. This was a multimedia composition for 3 musicians, a computer, and audience members. And everyone in the audience was given an audience response system, a clicker, if you will, where it might have like A, B, C, D, and E as options. And questions would come up on the screen, and the audience would answer the question with one of the multiple choice question. And the musicians on stage would choose a line of music based on the responses that they saw on the screen. So the musicians are kind of at an angle where they can see the audience, but they can also see the video screen. And this, the concept behind this, it was all based on the presidential election of 2008 in the United States, which was Barack Obama's first election with John McCain as his opponent. And the questions were political in nature, asked about foreign affairs and climate change and other. There were different sections, and sometimes an audience would be very conservative and the answers would lean towards the conservative, and sometimes it would be very liberal. And it was very interesting. I saw a couple of performances and then later performed in some of them myself. It was just very interesting to see how the music was influenced by the reactions of the audience. So, like I said, after 2008 experience, which I witnessed, I asked David and Taylor if they would do the performance again at my university in 2012, I guess, early in 2012. And they redid all of the music was essentially the same, but they redid all the questions. It was based on the 2012 election, and which was again Obama and I think Mitt Romney this time. And updated the questions to fit. I may have that backwards. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyway, you get the idea. And this time in 2012, I got to perform the piece at not only my university, but then 2 or 3 other places later on. And it was, like I say, very interesting to see the way the audience responded differently. Different audiences responded differently. So after that experience, I wanted to compose something that involved audience participation. I did not want to use clickers because I knew people who had already done that. I want to do something different. So I decided to use telephones, cell phones. By 2010, everybody had a cell phone. And of course, in every concert, you're instructed to make sure your phone is off. Well, I asked, when I still perform this, when I perform this, I asked the audience to turn on their phones and maybe to silence the ringers, but to turn on the phones. This is a composition that has 6 sections. It's for trombone and multimedia. I've got some music that happens on the computer and visuals that happen on the computer on the screen. And the trombone player plays along with that music and those visuals. And there are 6 sections representing sections of my life. So each day I might be involved with administration, composition, performance, technology, teaching, and family. The 6 zones of my life, the time zones. But no matter what my plan for a day for those 6 activities, there are always unplanned interruptions. I was a department chair at the time, and if you've ever been an academic administrator, you know that the phone rings and whatever you were doing might just have to wait. So I had this unplanned section that would interrupt anytime my phone rang, and my phone number was always on the screen of the projector. And anytime any member of the audience wants, they can dial my phone. It rings, and that causes the music to jump to an unplanned section, and the trombone player also has to jump with it. And this has been a fun piece. Like I say, I've done this a lot over the years. I'd be happy to come and do it at your school. And I've toyed with the idea of rewriting it for different kinds of ensembles, but it hasn't happened yet. In any case, this was my first experience with composing something for audience participation. And again, the audience didn't really know. They knew they were influencing the composition by interrupting it, but they didn't really have a sense of what happens musically when they interrupt. So I'm still looking at other ideas. That same year, 2010, my university happened to have a shooting on campus where I think 3 faculty members were killed in a faculty meeting one day, and tragedy that involves the whole community. The whole town was with us 1 week later for a memorial service that was very moving. And of course, anytime there is a big important event like that, it always involves music, and our music department provided lots of different powerful performances for this memorial service. And I got it in my head I wanted to compose something, and even though it was only in 1 week, I composed a short piece of 3 or 4 minutes long for trombone and timpani. And I had a wonderful friend who played timpani and did this with me, and she did great. Anyway, and the audience was invited to hum. It was a very tonal piece centered around the pitch D, and the audience, the saddest of all keys, D minor. And if you get that joke, and the audience was invited to hum the note D. So I don't have perfect pitch, and get louder and louder through the piece, and it can be very powerful. Anyway, a couple years ago during the pandemic, I composed a piece called Silly Rhymes for Trombone. Right now, I think I call it Trombone Rhymes, where the trombone player says it's unaccompanied. It's just a trombone player who plays some and then recites some poetry and plays some more, recites poetry, and the audience repeats certain sections of the poetry back to in the performance. So another opportunity for the audience to be involved. And then the most recent piece, which is the one that I'm going to perform for you today, is called Improvisatory Images. It's for any solo instrument, and it comes with a PowerPoint show that has slots for images and an automatic algorithm that puts those images in place. And the concept is that the performer will not have seen the images before performing. And so you start the show, it shows a picture, and the performer is to improvise based on what he sees. And the next picture might be very similar, or might be completely different. And the improvisation is meant to follow that in some way, to reflect what's on the screen. So if this were a live conference and we were all in the same room together, 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago when I started talking, I would have asked you to email me pictures from your phone. And the PowerPoint is set up so that when I click a certain button, it randomly chooses 10 of those images from a folder. They get all those images, if you email them to me, get dumped into a folder. It's all automated, and the PowerPoint chooses 10 of them, puts them in a sequence, and then it's on a timer. It shows one image for 20 seconds, and then it goes to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And so the whole piece is 200 seconds plus a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. So about 4 minutes long, and sometimes very successful, sometimes less so, and I'll leave it to you to decide. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope we have some time for question and answer afterwards. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Improvisatory images. much. That's Improvisatory Images.